Imagine a battlefield where the air is thick with despair, where soldiers face not only enemy fire, but also the relentless grip of starvation and biting cold. This was the Eastern Front during World War II, a theater of war marked by unprecedented brutality and suffering. Hey folks, welcome back to the Before Now channel. In today's episode, we'll dive deep into the harrowing experiences of German soldiers on this unforgiving front. Before we begin, if you're fascinated by the events of the World Wars and want to learn more about contemporary history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below. Your engagement helps us bring more fascinating history to life. Now, let's get to it. During World War II, the Eastern Front was not just a battleground, it was a crucible that tested human endurance to its limits. Known to Russians as the Great Patriotic War, it was the scene of the largest military confrontation in history. Over the course of 4 years, more than 400 Red Army and German divisions clashed in a series of operations along a front that stretched over 1,000 miles. The warfare was total and ferocious, encompassing the largest armored clash in history, the Battle of Kursk, and the most costly siege of a modern city, nearly 900 days in Leningrad. It also included scorched earth policies, the utter devastation of thousands of villages, mass deportations, mass executions, and countless atrocities committed by both sides. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, with the largest invasion force in history. During this operation, German forces were met with fierce resistance and brutal conditions, resulting in the loss of an estimated 27 million Soviet soldiers and civilians, along with nearly 4 million German troops. The failure of Operation Barbarossa marked a turning point, reversing Germany's fortunes. Stalin became increasingly confident that the Allied war machine would ultimately defeat Germany. The internal dynamics within the Soviet Union further complicated the situation. You may be wondering how exactly this unfolded. Well, let's explore that. In the early years of the war, some Soviet groups welcomed the Germans and even fought against the Red Army, hoping that Hitler's troops would liberate them from Stalin's rule. As the battles grew more desperate, Stalin issued Order No. 227, famously declaring not a step back. This order forbade Soviet forces from retreating without explicit instructions. The consequences were dire. Commanders who retreated without authorization faced tribunals, while ordinary soldiers risked being shot by their own comrades in blocking detachments if they tried to flee. However, the German military's advance into Soviet territory was not just a campaign for land, but also part of Hitler's genocidal vision to exterminate Slavic peoples. This led to horrific atrocities against both soldiers and civilians. From 1942 to 1943, German troops faced starvation, freezing temperatures that plummeted to 30 degrees, and relentless Soviet counterattacks. The harsh winter and brutal urban warfare resulted in staggering casualties, with 850,000 Axis forces suffering losses, compared to 750,000 Soviet casualties. The extreme conditions led to severe cases of frostbite, causing amputations and in many instances death among the soldiers. The city of Leningrad endured more suffering and hardship than any other city in the Soviet Union during the war. It was under siege for 872 days, from September 8, 1941 to January 27, 1944. This siege blurred the lines between survival and surrender as desperation set in, lasting nearly 900 days and resulting in severe hunger, malnutrition, disease, starvation, and even cannibalism. These conditions became common during the siege, with civilians losing weight daily, growing weaker, and becoming increasingly vulnerable to disease. Despite this, the citizens of Leningrad managed to survive through several methods, each with varying degrees of success. Since only 400,000 people were evacuated before the siege began, 2.5 million people, including 400,000 children, remained trapped in Leningrad. More managed to escape later, most successfully when Lake Ladoga froze over, allowing people to walk across the ice road known as the Road of Life to reach safety. Most survival strategies during the siege involved staying within the city and confronting challenges through resourcefulness or luck. One way to increase survival chances was by securing factory employment. Many factories became self-sufficient and possessed essential resources for winter survival, such as food and heat. Workers received larger rations than regular civilians, and factories producing crucial goods were more likely to have electricity. These factories served as mutual support centers, often offering clinics and services like cleaning crews and teams of women who sewed and repaired clothes. Despite the support, factory employees occasionally faced desperation and resorted to eating glue or horses when food was scarce. Nevertheless, factory employment remained the most consistently successful survival strategy, and at some food production plants, not a single worker died. The constant threat of Soviet counterattacks created an atmosphere of fear among German soldiers. The psychological toll was immense, leading to breakdowns among troops already exhausted by the harsh conditions. Over time, the brutality experienced by German soldiers was compounded by the atrocities committed against Soviet civilians. Nazi forces enacted horrific reprisals against local populations, fueling a cycle of vengeance. As German troops retreated, they faced brutal retaliations from the Red Army and partisan fighters. Captured Nazi soldiers were often executed on the spot or subjected to gruesome fates in revenge for the crimes committed by the Nazis. This battle epitomized the horrors of the Eastern Front. The encirclement of the German Sixth Army led to starvation and despair. Soldiers who had once been proud warriors found themselves reduced to scavenging for scraps or surrendering in hopes of survival. As the situation deteriorated, supplies dwindled and conditions worsened. Many soldiers faced a grim choice: fight to the bitter end or surrender to an uncertain fate. The psychological strain was unbearable, and some chose death over capture. Accounts from soldiers reveal scenes of unimaginable horror, where fellow comrades were executed for attempting to desert or simply for being too weak to fight. In these moments of desperation, the line between humanity and savagery blurred. The brutality of this siege also highlighted the extreme lengths both sides were willing to go to secure victory. Countless executions and atrocities were committed, further emphasizing the dehumanizing effects of the conflict. The Battle of Kursk in 1943, known as the largest armored clash in history, demonstrated the ferocity of combat on the Eastern Front. The scale of destruction was immense, with both sides suffering heavy losses that fueled a cycle of vengeance and brutality. By the end of 1943, the Soviets had reclaimed half of the territory taken by the Germans from 1941 to 1942. Soviet military-industrial output had increased substantially from late 1941 to early 1943, thanks to Stalin's decision to move factories far to the east, beyond the reach of German invasion and air attacks. This strategy paid off, allowing for significant industrial growth even while the Germans occupied more than half of European Russia, including 40% of the population, around 80 million people, and approximately 2.5 million square kilometers or 970,000 square miles of Soviet territory. The Soviets had been preparing for war for over a decade, training 14 million civilians in military tactics. Despite losing almost all of the original 5 million men in the Soviet army by the end of 1941, the Red Army grew to 8 million members by the end of that year. Even after suffering substantial losses in 1942, far exceeding German casualties, the Red Army's size increased to 11 million. While debate persists about whether Stalin's leadership helped or hindered these efforts, he generally left wartime economic management to his experts. The Eastern Front represented one of the most brutal chapters in military history, where mutual hatred and the desire for revenge shaped the experiences of both German soldiers and Soviet defenders. As we reflect on the brutal realities faced by German soldiers on the Eastern Front, it becomes evident that war is not just about strategy and victory. It's a human tragedy that leaves deep scars on all who are involved. Join us next time as we continue exploring history's most impactful moments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more insights into historical events. What aspect of this grim chapter in history would you like us to cover next? We'll be in the comments. Thanks for watching.